Hey, it's Alex Williams with the New Stack. Welcome to the New Stack Makers, a podcast where we talk about application development, deployment, and management at scale. Dell Technologies is a unique family of businesses that helps organizations and individuals build their digital future and transform how they work, live, and play. The company provides customers with the industry's broadest and most innovative technology and services portfolio, spanning from edge to core to cloud. Learn more at Dell.com. Hey everyone, Alex Williams here of the New Stack, here for another episode of the New Stack Makers. We're here live at KubeCon plus CloudNativeCon in San Diego. And with us today are two people I've gotten to know over the past several weeks and even longer than that. Nelson and I have known each other a while. But Nelson Su, Director of Solutions Marketing and Data Protection at Dell EMC. Good to see you again, Nelson.
Good to see you.
And Alexander Almeida, Consultant Product Marketing Team Lead at Dell EMC.
How you doing? Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited to kind of talk to you guys because one of the things that we're really trying to get a grasp on is how are cloud native technologies getting adopted? We've gotten past this point where cloud native technologies are still relatively new, but they're not brand new, right? We're almost like in the day two of the evolution. I think Dan Kahn in his keynote yesterday said that there's this comparison to almost Kubernetes being still in elementary school. And he talked about the second grade audience and the fourth grade audience.
Right.
And the second grade audience are learning now from the fourth grade audience, talking about his kids too, who play a lot of Minecraft. And, he was talking about the evolution of Minecraft with his kids.
There you go.
But one of the things I really wanted to talk about was, data protection. And this is something that you guys really are focused on. And we don't hear a lot about data protection.
Right.
And so I'm curious on how you see DevOps meeting data protection. What are those ways that you're seeing this intersection of data protection? Perhaps you could talk a little bit about the principles of data protection, how it's changed to some extent with cloud native technologies, and now what are some of the results of that? What are we seeing out there in the market?
No, it's a really good question, Alex. I think that Dan may reference it as the kids growing up, but I kind of I'm a big baseball guy, but I kind of look at the fact that we're not playing T-ball anymore. Yeah. We're not playing Little League anymore. Right. And maybe we're approaching that high school phase, but guys are getting scouted now by colleges and the majors. So, so maybe we're approaching.
If you can't hit the curve.
You can't. You've got trouble with the curve.
You're out.
Yeah. You're out. Yeah. So, we're looking more at that AAA and trying to get into the majors. And I equate that to DevOps meaning the power of data protection in the sense of DevOps now, as you take those workloads that are being built, these applications with agility and efficiencies built in mind, that they're trying to get to those mission critical workloads and now driving it more into that production environment. So, that's the majors, right? Being in those mission critical applications and workloads, kind of graduating to that level. I think it's a great time to have the discussion around data protection. I think here at KubeCon 2019, we're starting to hear more about it. We're starting to hear more about how they need to protect Kubernetes workloads because, it's great because initially everything was about disaggregating the DevOps world from infrastructure.
Right. Exactly.
And in that time frame, it's all great, right? Because there was the principles of containers, Kubernetes, serverless, and functions, and lived in that DevOps world. But now, as we migrate over or transform those applications into being distributed applications around cloud, multi-cloud, and hybrid, that's really now where you have to understand, okay, how am I going to protect that data? Because the data ultimately is really, really important in your value to those applications.
Yeah, it really is. And it gets into some discussions about, how we think about, cloud native apps and how they've been disaggregated really from the infrastructure itself, and persistent data though still needs to be protected. There's this layer of agility of containerization that you really need to think about. And now we're starting to see these new ways that we can think about data then in different contexts. What for you is the one truth about this change? Is there maybe even better said, like, what do you see? How are you seeing kind of the regeneration of the IT admin? How are you seeing them evolve? Because they're still responsible for managing their application architectures, right?
Right.
But now they're thinking about containerized workflows. And
Right.
how are they thinking about persistent data? Do they have a good grip on it? Or what are some of the things that you're seeing from them that is evident in your work, and how are you helping them out?
There's I think the key word is consistency, right? And so we have the Kubernetes admin meets the IT admin, right? And as they look at that consistency element, they have to look at observability, orchestration, and automation as those core key consistent concepts that still prevail regardless of your DevOps model, right? And I think that we see persistent volumes now elevating as a mainstream discussion point for everybody, and we look at, okay, how do you persist on your namespaces, right?
Yeah. So right on, Nelson. I think the other thing too is that if I take it up a higher level and just the personas around the team members that are bringing these newer technologies to a mission critical environment, you can't have DevOps admin versus IT infrastructure admin, right? It's this. They are all involved. They all have a role to play, and really from a data protection standpoint, when we talk about persistent volumes and persistent data, that is ultimately the value of the business, right? So as these new DevOps applications that come out of a DevOps culture get implemented into more of a mission critical environment, it becomes increasingly important to match the SLAs of a mission critical infrastructure. And that's where you need that data protection solution that's going to give that control and visibility to both sides of that team.
What is that solution then?
So we at Dell Technologies have been pioneering, in a sense, in working with Project Valero and VMware as well, to incorporate that approach to protecting persistent volumes, PVCs, and namespaces. And particularly our Power Protect software, which has been newly announced as well, is not only taking care of, as Bob put it in the previous session we had, where Dell Tech, you have your infrastructure, where you have your legacy applications, your virtualized applications, and now your containerized applications. So we cover the gamut from a data protection standpoint in that same vein. Not only do you have infrastructure that runs all three, but you need to protect all three types of workloads. So our data protection solution through Power Protect software enables that interaction. And now what we're going to be bringing to market at the end of this year is support for those Kubernetes workloads, right? So on top of the virtualization workloads and the legacy application integration that we have, we're going to also offer data protection for PVs, PVCs, and namespaces.
Okay. So for the namespaces, it's interesting. And so who would be responsible for this? This would be the IT management team?
That's a really good question. From a responsibility perspective, typically that will still reside with the backup admin mostly, but I think you will see a more federated approach where, as I said, you have this team effort where there needs to be observability and control of understanding what the backup SLAs are and the control of those SLAs from a DevOps perspective. The Kubernetes admin needs to have some visibility and control into that workflow. Same time, from an infrastructure admin perspective, they need to have visibility and control of everything that the DevOps side is producing. So when you look at the speed and the agility of the containers being provisioned, the PVs being provisioned, et cetera. They need to have that visibility to apply and protect those new workloads as they're being deployed, and at the speed of the deployment that a DevOps type of culture calls for. So it's that mindset that we feel it's really the control of both, and that's where we're approaching our control plane from. The perspective of giving that observability and control to both Kubernetes admin as well as the IT infrastructure admin.
So Nelson, when you're thinking about this, there's also kind of the specter of the multi-cloud, and we're hearing a lot more about the multi-cloud, especially at this conference. One of the things that's fascinating about the multi-cloud is that I think it's more about the dependent cloud, and is one way to put it, where we're dependent now on all kinds of clouds, right?
Right.
Where, and we see that in our everyday work. If I'm using Twitter, I'm using a service that's built upon APIs that's calling infrastructure, right? That's calling data,
Right.
right?
Right.
They have to think about their compute, storage, and network capabilities, and now everyone else is having to think about it too. And so when I think about that, I think about what is that multi-cloud strategy that applies to persistent data, and and when you're thinking about that, what is that agility you need to protect your distributed data sets across your multiple clouds?
Well, that's a really interesting question because, I think we all are still evolving into that world of multi-cloud, and we do a global data protection index that surveys about 2,200 plus customers and respondents, and over 40% of them still believe that they don't have the ability to protect their data because of the fact of that agility, because of the fact that everyone's going multi-cloud, because it's new ways of developing the applications with that speed and agility. As you look at multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, we work with a tremendous number of all of our partners there, right? Obviously, there's Dell Technology Cloud, which is very core and important as we work very closely with VMware, and vCloud Foundation, and our VxRail folks. And we also work very closely with AWS, Google, Azure, and others. I think as you look at that, it's those workloads that are distributed now, as well as that distributed data that are being built. So you have specific workloads for ML and AI that you may want to run in one particular cloud. You may have your mission critical ones that you want to run in, say, Dell Technology Cloud, because it's managed. You know that you have the optimization, you'll have the efficiency. It's that aspect that, when you look at what Pat Gelsinger said at VMworld, they have 5 core tenets around multi-cloud, and that is build, run, protect, connect, manage, and protect is really that key aspect. And that's where we've doubled down on a lot of the work that we're doing with VMware. And our Power Protect software for Kubernetes has some very deep integration to manage those and protect those VMware workloads. And we also obviously are working quite closely with Valero. So, Valero was started by Craig McLuckie and Joe Beda at Heptio before the acquisition of VMware, when it was known as Project Arc, right? And we're working with them in joint development and giving back to that project, as well as leveraging it quite heavily to protect Kubernetes workloads.
It's interesting then, how does that play into DevOps, Alex? Or how would you say that plays into the DevOps story?
It's a really interesting point and question you make in terms of, when we talk about the workloads as the center driver, as you move this cloud native DevOps workflow into an enterprise, into production, there are going to be different data-centric architectures that are going to need to take place, right? And you're going to have, a retail environment where you want to do AI and ML, at each individual store location, for example. So that data needs to be placed there and therefore needs to be protected there. So how do I work that into my DevOps application workflows and how I'm coding and designing my applications, cloud native applications, to account for that data protection at that edge, right? And also accounting for the main data repository back at the center that's providing all the business intelligence and the higher level views for the holistic enterprise. So there are these different architectures that I believe are going to come out of this. And that's exactly what the spirit of cloud native is kind of all about, this agility of being able to put whatever architecture fits your use case. And from there, you need a data protection solution that is going to be as agile, as holistic, but more importantly, as efficient as you need it to be. Because as you move this data around, geographically and from the edge back to the core, and being agile, you need to move data efficiently, and being able to protect data with technologies like data deduplication, which we are industry leaders in, is something that's going to be important as we move forward into this. So not only is it how you integrate with the DevOps workflow, but it's how are you being efficient in that DevOps workflow as well.
So when you're thinking about that, and and creating this reliability, this resiliency, this consistency, there's new practices that are emerging that provide new ways to think about your workloads. And at Dell, you're protecting a lot of mission critical workloads from customers, right? Who have systems of record that they've relied on for a long, long time. Mm-hmm. How do you apply concepts such as observability to these types of customers who are still relying upon these mission critical applications? They may have a Kubernetes substrate, but those are I think those use cases are just the beginning. We're just starting to see those emerge. I'm curious on KA's mission critical workloads and concepts such as observability in these new workflows.
Well, yeah, I think that it's allowing them to use the tools that they know today to manage these next gen DevOps workloads. And so the integration with their existing tools, so things like vRealize, or their tools that they're using, so we have deep integrations with traditional workloads around databases like Oracle or SAP or SQL Server. But it's also being able to handle those of new ones like MongoDB or others. So by integrating data protection, right, within those environments, so in all intents and purposes, it now just becomes part of the DevOps infrastructure. I think that's the key.
It just becomes part of it.
It's just part of it.
And I think as you also look at kind of observability from the perspective, there's no hard cutoff. There's going to be some refactoring of current applications that will get containerized and re-architected and deployed within a cloud native DevOps workflow that were legacy applications, legacy mission critical applications. And then you have those new Cassandra, MongoDB, those types of applications that were born in that environment. So it's that ability to integrate observability into the vSphere that both controls the legacy virtualized instances as well as the Kubernetes instances as well.
And it's also then the orchestration, the automation, right?
Yeah, exactly. So if we go out to the KubeCon floor, right, tremendous number of vendors, a great amount of vibe going out there. And I think that you see that the automation aspect, the orchestration, and obviously the security aspect, and we talk about it from a perspective of protecting Kubernetes workloads versus specifically containers, right? So we take more of a holistic view of it. I think that over time, you're going to see that the orchestration and the workflow vendors out there are now going to realize that holistically they need to bring into this world of DevOps the infrastructure and the way to protect that data in those persistent volumes.
Yeah. Once again, those persistent volumes that are so important.
Right.
So that provides some new responsibilities for the administrator, doesn't it? The Kubernetes administrator. Thinking about those mission critical workloads, you must be seeing some changes there.
Yeah, we do. And Alex will probably go into more detail, but the aspect is that instead of having to add more responsibility in the sense of managing specific containers, pods, workloads, we do take that holistic approach to basically protect the entire Kubernetes workload. So that goes back to the traditional RTO or an RPO that you need for those mission critical applications, but to be able to do it quickly, efficiently, and with agility. So those are, I think, 3 of those core tenets of DevOps.
Right. No, exactly. Yeah. I think the other aspect of this too is that is often left out of the conversation, and we're kind of guilty of it here as well, is that also resiliency is a big part of it. A lot of conversation going on around data protection, but from a security standpoint, right? And it's really not an either or. You have to look at data protection as a holistic approach, and it goes hand in hand with that data management that includes the backup and the recovery. And leveraging things like we have an architecture today where we leverage isolation to isolate copies of data. So if you think about it in a DevOps workflow, those PVs, those namespaces, those PVCs that are essential to your business, now leveraging backup and recovery in our architecture to isolate those copies and be able to recover that Kubernetes environment in the case of a ransomware or cyber attack.
Yeah, that's I wanted to get into that because there's this critical question about that. I mean, what we're talking about at the end of the day are these incidences where there are serious attacks that happen, and the attack surface for Kubernetes and container technologies is far different.
That's exactly right.
So how do you think about that?
Yeah, so you really have to think about this from a surface of attack perspective. What is that surface of attack? And as you go into a cloud native world, you have data being accessed from many different angles. There's a lot of different vulnerability points, and that data is essential to you. So really going forward, one part of that strategy not only is preventing the attacks from happening and preventing that data from getting destroyed or encrypted, et cetera, is leveraging an isolated copy, an architecture that moves that data into a secured vault architecture. And that's something that we've been talking about with the industry for a very long time now. And it's something that we see is going to be important as we go into this cloud native world. It's not going to be the entire cloud in terms of whatever your organization's cloud native deployment is, but it's going to be those essential key things that are running your touch point with your end users and customers.
There's also an interesting aspect too, right? Just in that perspective of flexibility and distributed data, that you can now also use that capability to do analysis from a secondary data perspective, right? So if I want to see if my ML and AI workloads are being effective, right? I don't necessarily have to work on it from an actual workload live data perspective, right? I can actually take that vaulted data set and use that to train my ML and my AI workloads.
Yeah.
And that's really where the conversation starts to pique people's interest, because it goes from, oh, you're just talking about backup and recovery to, well, wait a minute, I can use my backup copies of my PVs, PVCs, and namespaces to now do other things that I can do that I can't do in upset production with, right? So the data reuse is an increasing use case out of this holistic data management concept that we're talking about.
That's really interesting when you think about that, because it does, one thing about cloud native architectures, the attack surfaces are so different. And we were talking about this before, like nodes just pop up.
Exactly.
Right.
And especially as you're getting more into IoT, then now nodes continue to pop up. But how do you manage this without slowing down the pace? Because the workflows do depend a lot upon speed right now and that continuous delivery. And so how do you think about that with, data protection?
So as we look a little bit forward, right, the idea is that as we protect and isolate the critical components, the configuration information, the key things that are spawning up those nodes and those components, when we look at that, if that's protected and isolated, then I could potentially recover that and essentially stop whatever, the attack surface could be attacking the components that actually will go off and spawn up my new nodes, and every new node that gets spun up is ultimately attacked at that point, right? But if I can go in and pinpoint the attack right at the root cause and be able to protect that data and that configuration information into an isolated environment, I can essentially quickly recover and blow away what I've got and then eventually rebuild from a good gold copy. And that isolated environment also brings about other things that DevOps workflows can incorporate in that data reuse perspective and data analysis and introducing more data forensics, right? Building nodes in an isolated environment, for example, that run data analytics on the backup copies and throw up red flags, potentially could find anomalies before they turn into full-blown attacks. So there's a lot of use cases that really open up by the sheer fact of having this isolated vault.
Is Dell moving into this space then for using that data for machine learning capabilities, or is there open source projects that you're looking at and building upon, or is that going to be an interest for you all going forward?
I think it is. If you look at the overall Dell Technologies perspective, right? We've got so many assets with regards to VMware, with Pivotal, with VirtuStream, and Dell EMC. I think that we don't have a choice, right? Because that's where our customers are going. Right? And we're there to provide them that flexible environment that meets their needs, right? And so, we are naturally gravitating to that to be able to fulfill their needs based upon their compute, their storage, their application, their DevOps, the development there. So it is definitely a core area that Dell Technologies is focused on.
Well, just in conclusion, I'd love to kind of wrap things up and just review a little bit what we talked about. I'm getting a better understanding of data protection and how Dell's approaching it. I think that perspective on DevOps and data protection is a concept I think people are still getting their heads around.
Yes, definitely,
absolutely.
definitely.
Yeah, and you must be encountering that all the time. And it now reminds me of kind of this whole idea of reuse and the reuse of data and how you think about that data and how you can use that potentially to even protect yourself even better by learning from it. And then I think the whole idea of Kubernetes and the changing role of it. A lot of things though still are quite familiar to IT, in particular this idea of data protection. So it almost looks like almost could be a starting point in many ways for people who have a lot of experience in managing mission critical applications. Would you add anything to that? The only other thing I would add to that is like that then ushers in this whole kind of new thinking about observability, orchestration, automation, and resilience. Is there anything else you'd add to that?
I think really, it's the market is so broad in some respects when you talk about DevOps and we talk about cloud native, but again, it really does come down to those four tenets.
Yeah.
And that's going to be pervasive and persistent,
Yeah.
no pun intended, right? Throughout. And you're right, though. I mean, the whole aspect of cloud native, Kubernetes, cloud native data management, right? I think it's going to be a resonating theme as we go into 2020, right? And, and that has to do with the maturation of cloud native and where it's going.
I think the biggest thing that you can take away from this as a DevOps administrator or somebody developing cloud native applications is oftentimes what pops into your head is when you think data regulations, data governance, data backup, right? It's a decelerator, not an accelerator in your mind, right?
Yeah.
I can't work as quickly. I can't get this new application that I absolutely am excited about out there into the end users because I've got to comply with the IT SLAs and the infrastructure admins and what they're putting in place from a mission critical standpoint. So our philosophy is how do we build that data protection solution that provides everything that we've talked about and doesn't prohibit that acceleration and speed of these DevOps applications out there to end users, and that's really the key.
That's a really good point. Well, I want to thank you both for taking the time to talk today. I've been joined by Nelson Su and Alexander Almeida.
Almeida, you got it.
Great, and congratulations on taking this next step and and thinking through how DevOps and data protection do really intersect, and especially now as we reach deeper into these cloud native architectures. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you for having
Great.
us.
Appreciate it.
Dell Technologies is a unique family of businesses that helps organizations and individuals build their digital future and transform how they work, live, and play. The company provides customers with the industry's broadest and most innovative technology and services portfolio, spanning from edge to core to cloud. Learn more at Dell.com. Listen to more episodes of the New Stack Makers at thenewstack.io/podcast. Please rate and review us on iTunes, like us on YouTube, and follow us on SoundCloud. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.